So it's very common to compare the woke to religious people, and I can see why you would do that. But in my estimation, the woke are less like the religious and more like the spiritual but not religious. I think they're a lot like new agers. In fact, the woke, the way I see them, they're political new agers. And let me explain why I think that. I've made a list here of why I think they're more like a new age community. First, there's this obsession in the spiritual but not religious community, the new age community, with radical subjectivity. The belief that instead of going through a church or a religion to find God, to have that intermediary, you're seeking direct experience, radical subjective experience with divinity. So this sort of reliance on radical subjectivity maps pretty well on if you're going to move from the spiritual but not religious into the political, it maps very well onto something like lived experience. So this radical subjectivity kind of opens the way for, you might say, gullibility, mass programming, because if everything's subjective, you can start to drift into the realm of relativism when it's translated to the political. In fact, if you read 1984 very closely, essentially the party has hijacked the consciousness, the subjective experience of the people, and now can program the people. And once you open up to the idea that all of reality is simply a lived experience, well, once you open up to that, if people can somehow program you to think a certain way about your lived experience, they control your mind. So you can see in the woke this spiritual but not religious impulse. Now, there are two types of spiritual but not religious woke people. There are the atheist wokesters. Now, these people have no belief in a higher power, none of that. But they have a spiritual impulse, even though they wouldn't call it that. And the spiritual impulse is a spiritual but not religious impulse. They want to be unconditionally loving. They seek oneness. They seek abundance. And those impulses get channeled into politics, and they start to look a lot like spiritual but not religious people when those things are expressed through the political. Then you have what I call the namaste woke. The namaste woke are spiritual people, people who believe in a higher power, people who are truly spiritual but not religious. And when they get into politics, they start to manifest their ideals of oneness, their ideals of abundance, their ideals of unconditional love through the political, and they end up in the exact same place as the atheist wokesters. So the namaste wokesters and the atheist wokesters, when they don't know they're doing it, but they unconsciously apply spiritual principles, they seek political sainthood, and they end up looking like not religious folks who are more bound by a single book and dogmatic edicts. They start to look more like spiritual but not religious people who have a variety of texts, a variety of gurus that they follow, and no real dogma. I mean, okay, there is dogma in the woke community, but in my estimation, and I'll go through some more reasons why I think this is so, they start to mirror the spiritual but not religious. And then the namaste wokesters, they end up looking just like the atheist wokesters because they take their spiritual principles they're more conscious of these ideals of oneness, abundance, and unconditional love. And when they channel it into politics, because they're not very sophisticated, it comes out looking like woke progressivism. It's the same as woke progressivism. So you see the promotion of like the spiritual journey on both sides. One is in the atheist wokesters, it's more unconscious. In the namaste wokesters, it's more conscious, but it leads to the same place. So you see this ideal of a spiritual journey. You're on the spiritual journey or spiritual mission. And that's how spiritual but not religious people think and believe. In politics, that's an activist life. So the quest of the mystic becomes the activist quest, okay? The idea of, in the spiritual but not religious community, to align with your higher self, this becomes, in politics, being a social justice warrior. I had a professor who wrote a relatively well-known paper suggesting that at the peak of the self-actualization pyramid is being a social justice warrior, being an activist, a left-wing woke progressive activist. That's how you become fully human. So you can start to see that, again, the higher self becomes the political self. Cosmic consciousness, which you might call globalism, Their idea of union or oneness becomes feeling one with marginalized groups. Their idea of unconditional love becomes like cashless bail or unfettered immigration. They express their love for others by being soft on crime, right? So you can see these New Age principles that are, I think, more about the mystical side of religion, if you will, than actual like a traditional religious impulse. It's more on the mystical side of religion, which is what New Ageism is. They treat, if you want to understand the woke, they pretend everything. You wonder why they align with nefarious elements in society. They align with terrorist groups. They align with criminals. It's because they look at those entities as lepers. Everything to them is like St. Francis hugging the leper. That's what they think they're doing. They say in spiritual communities, when the heart chakra is completely open, you become extremely gullible. And I think that's true. They feel like they're empaths, the wokesters, like they can really feel the feelings of marginalized communities. You see AOC down at the border, faux crying. I mean, some of them, here's the thing about the woke. I think they're really trying to be good people, right? I really do believe that most of them are trying to be good people. And they're trying to achieve something noble through politics, but you can't achieve actual unconditional love through politics because you end up inverting reality. You see, like a true mystic is unconditionally loving, but also has wisdom. So he can love, a true mystic, he or she can love the criminal, but know the criminal needs to be behind bars for 40 years, right? You put them behind bars, then you love them and try to change them behind bars. You can have compassion for a terrorist leader. You understand, had I been born there, so on and so forth, I might do the same thing, but it still means, from a worldly perspective, they're evil and they need to be dealt with. That could be assassination, that could be war. You still have wisdom, right? You have a foot in both worlds when you're a truly wise person. One foot is in the real world where there's good and evil, and the other foot is in the spiritual world where you have love and compassion, even for the worst amongst us. But you don't translate that into politics, and that's what I think the woke are doing. You can see things like sacred geometry, if we go that way into New Ageism, where there's racism and sexism that's found in benign things. You can see there's a form of meditation. You might call it problematizing or criticizing in the sense of critical theory. There's woke mantras, just like there's New Age mantras, no justice, no peace. There's ascended masters, and you go to pay to hear them speak, and you read their books like D'Angelo and Coates. There's invisible energies around that you got to be careful of. Things in people's auras like implicit bias. The evil eye becomes the male gaze. Bad karma is white guilt and white privilege. Past lives could be colonialism. Enlightenment, even the word woke, think about it, even the word woke is like a mystical term, like enlightenment. A light worker becomes an anti-racist activist. Shadow work is working on your own implicit bias. There's the third eye is the critical eye. I may have mentioned that. Ego death could be seen as like killing off, your belief in objectivity. Sacred spaces in woke politics become safe spaces and actually morph into neo-segregation. There's holier than thou competitive displays in woke politics, the same way that if you've ever been in a New Age group, everyone's trying to be the most holy, the most kind, the most loving. And you can see, finally, economically, if you go to any New Age meetup, there's a talk of abundance. And when you start to believe in abundance, politically, this becomes redistribution, this becomes socialism, this becomes MMT, this becomes et cetera, et cetera. So I see the woke not as religious, but more as political New Agers. Now, where does the viciousness come from? I'll do another talk on that, but I think it comes from certain medieval impulses and a return of certain black magic beliefs. But tell me what you think.